Well, for those who are new to joining me on these Sunday morning calls, just very briefly, um, the calls are really about, it's an opportunity for us to explore this, to explore what's happening here. Um, there isn't anything else to explore, of course, than what's happening here in our experience and what we call experience. But we have a tendency as humans to imagine, without really even being aware that we're imagining this, assuming this, that we actually know what all of this is, that we're saying we're seeing or hearing or feeling or sensing. Because we have this developed consciousness, life, whatever, how the intelligence of the universe has developed this capacity to render what's showing up, to seemingly capture and describe and categorize and characterize it with language and concepts. And because of that and the power of that, the seeming power of that, the seeming ability we have to actually discern or determine what this is, what any given experience is. And then, of course, then we describe it. Leads us to believe that we've kind of figured it out, that we've, yeah, sure, I've got a name for this thing that's being recognized in this instant, whether it's what we would call an object of the world, like the room you're sitting in or the computer you're on or your phone, or some subjective state that we also have names for many of those. And it's really quite something to begin to explore the ways in which what's happening actually doesn't conform to what our interpretations and our conceptions and our renderings suggest that it is. It doesn't actually, it diverges from what we think it is. In fact, what's extraordinary about what's here experientially is that it is diverging, moving away from, if you will, from what you think it is. The instant you've rendered it, the instant we have described what's here, consciousness has labeled what's here, seemingly made sense of it. Oh, I know what this is. It's what's happening in the words that I'm using to describe it. And no sooner does that happen than the experience has already deviated from that description, right? Because without having to do 20, 30, 40 years of spiritual practice to see this, we can just take a few moments and we can see that the current perception that's here, the current arising, the current appearance of this moment is not stable in the sense of it's transforming itself into the next thing, isn't it? So how, given that, I mean, just feel that in your own experience right now, how the moment slips away. The current perception, because of its dynamic nature, its non-static nature, isn't here long enough to say or think anything about it, actually, which is sort of turns the world upside down on its head in a sense, because we're operating, conceptualization operates from this sort of presumption of being able to pull it off, essentially, like, oh yeah, I know what this is because I've conceptualized it. But I'll sometimes use the metaphor of a cloud or water, and to try to describe the form of the cloud or the form or shape that the water is taking in any given moment is a fool's errand. I mean, we can do it, and we do it, and but in a very real sense, we're speaking about memory because, again, the shape has shape shifted. The shape of the cloud, the shape of the water, the shape of our experience. Because your experience is, right? It's got shape seemingly, but the shape is on the move. And so in a sense, it never really assumes a fixed shape. So this is one of the central reasons why defining what's here isn't actually possible, at least not in any definitive sense. Now that turns out to be actually the case. We can look at experience and see the way in which the moment doesn't allow for that, because the moment's dynamism doesn't allow for it to be pinned down and defined and specified. Because again, what you're specifying has slipped away. So what are you specifying? It's just this evaporation of what's here. It's sort of like, how long is now? What we call now. What we call this instant, the actuality of now, not what we might call what was or what might be, but this flash, this now. But it's just like the snap of my fingers. I mean, it's like, how long is now? What's strange, though, is that we could also say it has no time, it has no duration because of its instantaneous disapparition no sooner than it appears. But there is at the same time the constancy of now, the constancy of something being here, seemingly, of something being present. It's constant. When does it ever go away? When does now, or the presence of what's seemingly here, ever go away? It never goes away. It's very persistent. And yet, again, this is irrational in the sense of being two things simultaneously, seemingly. Like I said, it's constantly evaporating and never really takes form, and yet it's constantly here. So when it sounds like, the ramblings of a crazy person to say that. But that's actually, feel your experience, feel the way in which that is so, that there's this simultaneous sense of because of the dynamic nature of this not holding still, the aliveness of it. I mean, try to hold this moment in place. Keep it from changing into something else. It's moving, or so it seems. And yet, always here, always here. And in that sense, there's no movement whatsoever. There's just absolute stillness, absolute non-moving, absolute persistence. That shows up as all of this dynamism and all of this activity and all of this transience and all the comings and goings of reality. Now, this is both extraordinary to feel this, to discover this about our experience. I mean, you're not making anything new. You're just recognizing the way experience actually is, its paradoxical nature. But when you think about the kind of consensus reality sort of seeming human condition, and I'm a separate subject navigating a world of experience, the objects of my experience, whether they're external or internal to me, right? That we are in this place, and we all know this as humans, of trying to sort of engineer our way into being okay. manipulate our way or manage or modify our experiences and our circumstances such that we can be at home, be okay, feel good, feel happy, feel free, feel well, and so on. I mean, this is just an impulse we have as humans. But the whole idea that some parts of the experiential field, some aspects of reality, that one piece of reality is somehow better than another piece of reality, and that we then identify as the one I want to go after and have less of the one that is less than in the hierarchy of my experience, rests upon what? It rests upon the fantasy of describability. It rests upon the belief that we can actually render what's here. Otherwise, I mean, the categories of, if you take the very broad categories of positive and negative experiences and circumstances, the ability to describe some moment as positive or negative rests upon our idea that we can actually capture what's here in a descriptive framework. But if you feel your experience right now, which is what you're always feeling anyway, but just notice experience, any aspect of your experience. Doesn't matter where you point your attention. You could point it to a specific aspect of your experience, or just relax it and don't point it anywhere in particular. And if you relax it and don't point it anywhere in particular, things tend to come into view. Some aspect tends to come into view. So attention sort of seems to bring things into view just spontaneously. But wherever attention happens to land or rest for a moment, feel the presence of your experience. And ask yourself this question that I always ask, which is not an analytical question, but an experiential question, which is, what is here that's being tasted or touched or felt or sensed or thought? I mean, you could take something like, let's create an experience of, I want you to think about something, have a thought about something, like something that you're going to do or you'd like to do later today, so you can bring that into your consciousness as a thought. So like, I'm going to be driving back to Northern California. I'm in Southern California right now. So I'm going to make the drive back to Northern California later today. So I have that thought, right? Now I know what it is. It's a thought. I can tell you I'm having that thought right now. Okay. So go ahead and bring some thought to your own consciousness. And you're thinking because something's present there, right? That you're calling a thought, whatever it might be. And now ask yourself this question: what is thought? What is it that's actually there? And feel what's there. Feel the presence of thought, of the thought. What's the thought made of? In the same way that, I might say that my shirt is made of cotton, and I can feel the texture of the cotton of my shirt if I touch it, or I feel it on my skin, the texture of what my shirt is made of. What's the texture of your thought? What is the thought made of? There it is. You can see the thought, or know the thought, know the presence of the thought. Well, what is it that's actually present that you're knowing as thought? What is that? What's there? What is an idea? It's subtle beyond subtle, beyond subtle, beyond subtle, and ultimately unfindable, what that thought is made of, or what anything is made of. You can just let go of the thought and just let attention again wander and go wherever it wants to go in the field of your experience. And wherever it lands, you can ask the same question: what is this? What is this? What is breathing? Attention just landed on the feeling of the breath. Well, what is breath? Not as a concept of air moving into my lungs. That's a concept. What is it? Oh, there's a sensation there. What is a sensation? Not as a concept of, something touching nerve endings in the body or something like this. What is the experience of a sensation? I experience it like a receding horizon. I try to move towards what things are, and it's like they move away from me, like the horizon. I never can quite reach the horizon. I never can get to what it is. I can't find what it is. I can't locate it. I can't say where it is. I can't say what it is or how it is. And yet here it is, seemingly. So it's very peculiar. It's like I can't, here's a world and I can't find the world as a pin downable, resolvable phenomena. There it is. I found it. It's that. It's like in a sense I'm asking, like, get to the essence of what it is. I mean, take yourself. What are you? You say, I'm on a Zoom call. When you say that, what are you referring to? What is it? What is it that's sitting here listening right now? What is that? What is that that's seeing the world that we might conventionally call the self? What is that? What is it that is noticing the full range of experiences that are arising? Feel that. Feel whatever it is that's experiencing this moment. What is that? Can't be found. It's very strange. You can't, we believe conventionally that we're a subject in a world of objects, and you can't find a subject and you can't find an object. You can't find boundaries. Where are they? I had an email correspondence with someone just this morning, and they were writing about reflecting on a conversation we'd had before and a poem that I'd written quite a few years ago called Hearts Without Skin. And they were exploring for themselves this idea of being bound in a skin suit, right? That's what we often think of the edge of us is the skin, right? And beyond the skin is not me anymore, right? But if you just feel what you call skin, forget about the concept of a skin with some sort of definable edge to it, and you just feel the presence, the experience, feel your skin, you know it as experience, don't you? Not as a concept, but as an experience of having skin, whatever that is. Feel that as experience. And notice how there is no edge. You don't come to the end. There's no edge to experience. And so these discoveries about the nature of our experience that I'm describing, trying to point to in words, which is very difficult to do, basically impossible. Um, for the seeming human creatures, the subjects we seem to be navigating the world, has all sorts of beneficial implications, because the things that challenge us and trouble us and that we feel we're somehow caught in or stuck in or at the mercy of or victimized by, experientially, circumstantially, are defined into existence. It's not to deny the reality of those from the perspective of the defined world that we often feel as if we're inhabiting. But there's another world, the indefined, the indefinable. It's not two worlds, which is really strange. It's just one world that can show up as apparently definable and defined into pieces and parts. And then there's the experiential world, which doesn't have pieces and parts. There's no pieces to your experience. Even all the seemingly discretely discernible and identifiable aspects of experience, like thought and emotion, that we label these two different dimensions of experience as if they're separate pieces in the field of experience. And in a sense, they can be seen as like there's a thought and it's different from an emotion, or there's a sensation of sound and it's distinct from the sensation of sight, right? Here's sound in its own unlocatable realm of sound. Where is sound happening? Well, it's here. And it's distinct from seeing light, right? But at the same time, in much the same way that you could look at two seemingly discrete waves in an ocean and realize there's just a singularity there, just water. In a sense, in a very real sense, these seemingly discrete parts and pieces of the experiential field, like light and sound, you can't find where does light, the field of light and the field of sound begin. They're discrete and yet inseparable. It's as if sound is coming out of light and light is coming out of sound. They're absolutely inseparable. And yet they show up as apparently separate. Very curious, isn't it? I mean, one big, very distinct difference in, say, these two broad perspectives that I'm describing, the perspective of separation and divisibility of subjects and objects, right? And pieces and parts, that perspective, which, pretty much is consensus reality perspective that we just take for granted is true. And this other perspective is of inseparability, of indivisibility, is much less heard of and pointed to in our human existence. But the implications, the feeling, if you will, of those two perspectives, they can feel quite different. The feeling of being separate from my experience, and my experience can, like, there I am, and this big experience of whatever difficulty or grief or pain or something is like this wave, and it's like here it's coming and enveloping me, like I'm at the mercy of this wave, right? That's the normal. And then now I want to do something to change the wave, get rid of the wave, have a better wave of experience, right? That's kind of the implication of that divided world. It can feel that way. Not always. Sometimes the waves are very pleasurable. It's like, oh my God, I love this wave. Bring it on. It feels great, but it's not always that way, is it? And so we often feel quite vulnerable as the imagined separate pieces, the pieces we imagine ourselves to be, the pieces of reality. But from the perspective of the whole, of the seamless, indivisible whole, from that perspective, there's no vulnerability. Not as a concept, but as an actual experience. Feel right now, I just wrote this in my little blurb to announce this meeting this week. I'll just read it to you because, I don't know, it feels very true to what I want to share. So just feel the flow of your experience right now, the flow of what's here. Forget about all your thoughts about it. Just feel the presence of your experience as a felt sense. And as you do this, just notice that there's no clear boundary anywhere, no boundary separating self from other, no boundary line that can be found separating the subject from the object. If you feel I'm a subject in a world of objects and you feel the subjectivity that you're imagining, again, that feeling of it doesn't come to a discrete, identifiable end. It's endless. There is no boundary to the self, to the subjectivity. So feel that. In a sense, it's all subjectivity or all objectivity. In other words, there's no subject and no object from this perspective. Feel that. Feel that there's no clear line, no clear wall, no clear gap between self and other. It can't be found. Feel that. There's just a seamless whole, undivided. So there's no subject or object in this perspective. There's just experiencing. No experiencer having an experience, just a dynamism of experiencing, of perceiving, of knowing, of feeling. And in this perspective of no subject object, the felt sense of this, of indivisibility, of one thing here, there is just the deep ease and peace of having nothing to get, nothing to obtain, and absolutely no one to get it or obtain it. That's why it's completely at ease. There's no longer someone looking for something. There's just this. There's no one searching and nothing to search for. There's just the shine, the radiance, the presence of whatever this is. Existence, the mystery, God, whatever you want to call it. But there's really no word will suffice. It's a very different perspective with a different felt sense of what it means and the implications of it, and from this place, it's pure invulnerability, because there's not one thing potentially pushing against or hurting or harming another thing. There's just one sea of reality without any pieces or parts. And that's probably a good place to end the call, but no, I'm just kidding. Happy to hear what might be brewing in you as you reflect upon what I'm talking about and pointing to in terms of this, you can say, this other way of encountering what's here that's very different.
You know, one of the things that characterized the world of thought, I thought, was confusion. Mm-hmm. That with its opposite of certainty.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so every moment is like a bullet to our certainty, and engenders confusion that it is painful, mm-hmm. that we need to fix, it seems.
Right.
And one of the elements of the perspective that you're mm-hmm. Highlighting is there's no confusion.
No. Exactly. There's not actually something findable to be confused about. That's what's amazing. Like, there's not something there to be confused about, because you can't pin it down, which might sound like confusion because you can't know what it is fundamentally. But the whole need to know what it is and pin it down is like a non-issue from the perspective of the radical indefinability of this. So yes, there's no confusion.
And along those lines, once again, you've kind of blown my mind. So what you speak of is like mind blowing, mm-hmm. in the truest sense of the word, where my mind cannot grasp and is useless in what you're saying. It's just not something I can figure out. It's not something I can logically understand. Like you said in the beginning, we don't know what this is, and the mind will try to know, but
right.
It cannot know. And once again, you blew my mind.
Yeah, and it tries, it tries to wrap its head around it. It's understandable impulse to try to figure it out. And in a sense, in a very real sense, there isn't anything wrong with what you're describing as the movement of mind trying to figure out whatever it's trying to figure out. Now, what's really interesting is that, like, all the interpreting and all the describing and all the narrating and all the defining, in a sense, I'm sort of saying, well, wait a minute, like, relax all of that and come back and feel what's here and recognize that all the narratives and interpretations can't encompass this because it's too vast, it's too infinite, it's too dynamic, and so on, right? So I talk a lot like that. What's really interesting is, though, is that sort of one can have that discovery of the way in which what's here transcends our ideas about it. But all the thing that we describe, the things we describe as thinking and narrating and generating interpretations and so on, that's also not what we think it is either. In other words, anything that we think is a problem from this perspective is not a problem, because problems are defined into existence. So what we call being lost in conceptualization, that one could say, well, John's talking about freeing yourself from being lost in all the interpretations and imagining them to be true. But being lost in interpretation is a description of something that's indescribable. So in a very real sense, the freedom from interpretation is realizing that you were never lost. That being lost never actually happened. That's also defined into existence. I mean, that's how radical this indeterminacy is. in its like, that's how absolutely profound and all, and it touches everything. Nothing is I mean, I really consider that nothing about this can be pinned down. Not one thing. And where does that leave you? Well, it leaves you right where you always are, which is right here. I mean, you don't go anywhere. You're still here. But what here is, I mean, just take that idea, like, oh, Pam, are you here? And Pam, you would probably say, yes, I'm here. There's a sense of here-ness, right? Well, explore that. What's here-ness? You can't find that either. And yet, it's very paradoxical, isn't it? It's like, I know what here-ness is. It's here. It's here. It's present. And I talk a lot about presence. And it's like, you can't find presence either. You can't pin that down either. but it's so beautiful, I mean, to me, that it's somehow there's some kind of beauty in this transcendental, that it's so far, 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 far beyond what we conceive of it to be.
And just the shape-shifting aspect that you described too. Often in the summer, or I do a lot of cloud watching. And if I really, focus on looking at a cloud and just it's in constant flux. It's constantly, it doesn't hold its shape for any length of time at all. And to use that analogy for my everyday experience, there's not 1 second that is similar to another second. And it's this constant shifting, and that's beautiful. I mean, unless it's an ugly shift, that can happen too, but the shifting itself is the beauty.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You feel yourself. I was inviting everyone to feel whatever they think of as themselves, and just like the cloud, you're like a cloud, and that whatever you think of yourself to be is, you just turned into something else, right? And then something else, and then something else. So what's the shape of Pam? And we'd like to imagine we can like hold it still for a moment and like freeze the frame, like in the movie. Now I could put a limit around it and a boundary around it. And I there it is. I've pinpointed that moment in time. I froze it. I froze a moment, and there's Pam, or there's whatever the experience is I'm defining. I froze it in time. But reality will just say, sorry, you can't do it. It doesn't cooperate with that, because its nature seems to be to shapeshift.
And even if I were to say, I'm this body is constantly shape-shifting as well. I'm shedding cells, hairs are falling out, a breath will go in, it just constantly shape-shifting.
Every instant. And that's, the word freedom is used a lot, as you know, in different spiritual traditions. And, it's the freedom from all identities, and freedom from all the ways that we think this is, and the way we think we are, and the ways we imagine ourselves caught or limited.
I find it interesting how this perspective affects the conceptual world, in that we no longer expect the conceptual world to give us certainty or to totally describe our experience.
Right.
So we could use it much more lightly and joyously.
That's beautifully said, Ed. Yeah, I feel very much the same way, that it's like we can play, it's like playing with perspectives, letting perspectives come into view. This is how it looks right now. I could have a perspective, and I can enjoy the seeming solidity, and I can enjoy the seeming holding still long enough to enjoy a moment of beauty, or an experience, or whatever it is. And I can enjoy the process of interpreting and trying to make sense of what's happening here, of the mind's doing that. But like you say, there's this, there can be this growing recognition that, well, you can't really pull it off. You can't really succeed at that project of putting it into a container, because it's too wild, it's too transcendentally free to be captured and caged in any net of concepts and ideas. And so, yes, the kind of net effect of that, if you will, is, yeah, I'm going to hold the concepts a lot more lightly because I know that they're not any sort of gospel about the way this is, because the way this is can't be said, can't be thought, because it's infinite. It can't be limited. And even when we're in a process of defining and analyzing and interpreting, that it just goes on probably to our last breath, we're never actually succeeding at limiting what is fundamentally unlimited, of making finite what is fundamentally infinite. It's like it doesn't actually happen. We can have the sense that it's happening. We can have the sense of being small and contracted and limited and identified and divided. We can have that sense. But if we investigate any of those experiences that we're defining as limited and isolated and divided, the same thing will be discovered, that what you find is infinity anywhere you look.
When you mentioned the skin exercise, just feeling what your skin is.
Right. Yeah, feeling skin, exactly.
And I was feeling the lack of boundary to it. And then you moved on to something else, and you were talking about something else, and I thought of a better word than skin for me. I thought of the word membrane. So I did a little Google search real quick to see what the definition of membrane is, and it said something like a thin, soft, pliable layer. But it's still a layer, isn't it? It's right. Still defined as something that has a boundary, even though you're getting more accurate description when you say pliable.
Right. And that's why at a certain point, the Tao that can be named is not the real Tao. It's like we can. I mean, I've been at it for a long time, trying to find ways of languaging all of this stuff that are hopefully helpful in some way and illuminating in some way and evocative in some way of that which is beyond words ultimately. But it's really helpful to not get too concerned about the particularities of the words being used, because they're always going to be limited, and never quite do the trick. So that's helpful to kind of see that and recognize that whatever you call it it's like, it's funny, it's like, yeah, it's I mean, one of the things that the labeling process misses is the utter uniqueness of every instant, right? So if you are having an experience, Bill, or I'm having an experience that we call a moment of insecurity, let's say, okay? So it's a familiar pattern seemingly that we're then rendering and describing and defining. But the specifics of what's being encountered that moment, where is the reference point for them? Well, I guess memory in some sense, right? Like I can recognize the pattern that I'm describing as insecurity or whatever it is. There's some familiar, it's got a familiar whiff to it, a flavor to it, right? Just like the flavor of a food. It's like, oh yeah, that's a flavor of a strawberry. I know what that is. How do you know what that is? Because of memory. Because you've had other things that seem similar to that. And that then becomes, because knowledge always has this reference of the past, doesn't it? If I give you some food that you've never encountered before, Like I go to some other planet and I bring back this food that you've never tasted before. Well, you'll have no way to know what it is, will you? You'll have no familiar reference points for it. In a very real sense, that's actually true to our experience right now. Like right now, your experience, there's not a past reference point. Because if reality is dynamic and shape-shifting, it's always becoming something unique, always becoming something that hasn't been before. Even if in the subtlest of ways. And so language and conceptualization works from this kind of generalization process. Like, oh yeah, you know that thing you're eating that you're calling a strawberry? Well, it's kind of like other strawberries. You know, in general, it tastes like a strawberry. But no, it has a very specific signature that's unique to that particular moment. And that becomes very interesting. That is yet another recognition that reveals the indefinable nature of this, because this hasn't been here before. So how can you define it? This moment is like, you could be sitting in your room right now and it feels more or less like the same room you've sat in hundreds and thousands of other times, let's say, right? So it feels like it's more or less, it's like there's a continuity to the room that you're in, isn't there? Yeah, I'm in the same room, but are you in the same room? Well, experientially, you're not. So if we let experience be primary for purposes of this investigation, rather than, oh, there's an objective world that we're then experiencing, but you let experience be the primary, from the perspective of experience, you've never been where you are right now, ever. The way it feels, the way the room feels right now, the way you might be thinking about the room, the way the light is, the way the shadows on the wall, the very specific, very specific. You know, as you know, our friend Peter likes to say, you know, the world is made of specifics, not generalities, which I love, one of my favorite things that he says. And when you get into the specifics, you essentially pull the rug out from defining, because you can't define, there's no reference point. And that's the free fall of indescribability. But we can enjoy what's here, even as it's slipping away. Why not? Why not enjoy what's here?
You know, Bill, when you were talking about a membrane, I was thinking, you know, it's sort of a semi-permeable membrane. And so we're constantly leaking out parts of ourselves,
right,
and parts of the world are leaking in. And so there's another boundary that is very foggy, and another
I think
way.
it's even more than semi-permeable. It's absolutely permeable. It's just, you could say the world is one permeable membrane. Everything penetrating everything else, unstoppably. You know, we're just completely, I mean, this is the intimacy, right? It's like complete intimacy of everything with everything else. Like nothing, everything's touching everything else. There's no stopping. I mean, nothing's blocking anything else. Nothing's in the way of anything else. It's complete interpenetration of reality, interpenetrated with itself. I mean, you can feel that. Where is something stopping something else? Where is something blocking something else? We can have that as an idea, but as experience, there's just experience. And it's always here. It's the only thing that there is. And there's no being cast out of it. How would you be cast out? You are experience. How can you be cast out of it? It's not like experience is this thing sitting here and you can be thrust out of it and lose touch with experience, reality, and then somehow do something like spiritual practice to get yourself back into the field of experience. It's like you are the field of experience. Where could you go? So you're always home. You're always here. And from this perspective, one of the radical things about it is it doesn't matter what you're experiencing, because every experience is, in its basis, we could say, in its fundamental, indefinable, transcendental indescribability, is home. The home of presence. And every experience is that. So that cuts through the tendency to create these hierarchies of better and worse when it comes to experience. Yes, as organisms that we seem to have preferences for certain types of experiences over others. But again, from this other perspective, it's what the Tibetans call the equalness and evenness of everything. The equalness, the one taste inside of all tastes, the taste of the absolute, the taste of what's ultimately beyond description. And that's what you're tasting right now. There isn't anything else actually to taste. You taste a moment of sadness, you're tasting God, you're tasting infinity. You taste a moment of joy, you're tasting the same thing, just another version of it, another flavor of it. Just like chocolate and vanilla are both flavors of ice cream, what are they fundamentally is ice cream. So the flavors of reality are flavors of reality. They're reality. They're flavors of the absolute. But if we're only orienting to our descriptions, we can miss that, seemingly. We can imagine that there's nothing the same about those moments, and one is better than the other, and more preferable than the other, and more evidence of my being okay than the other, and on and on and on. That's the value, we could say, of discovering this other perspective of the transcendental that is the basis of each described flavor of experience, because then we can come to see that we're never missing that, even when all hell is breaking loose at the level of the descriptions. Our health is failing. We feel a mental confusion or turmoil, or no, all of that is also absolute reality, because there's only absolute reality. What else could there be? Body, mind, emotions, personality, all of it is made of absolute reality, absolute indescribability, absolute radiance, all of it. Every little quirk, every seeming limitation, all of it. And that can be discovered by just peering around the edges of your descriptions of things, so to speak, and seeing what's actually there that the descriptions are pointing to. And then seeing, as we were doing together, that you can't find that, you can't pin that down, and that's the freedom. I was writing something the other day about how when we tend to be orienting primarily to our descriptions of things, it's a bit analogous to, you know, if the world is a light show, of being very caught up in what's the show, you know, what's the content of the show? Is it to my liking? Do I not like it? What do I think about it? Am I going to be okay with this light show that's happening? And reorienting to something that's more fundamental or basic, we could say, about the content, is the fact that there is a light show. That's what's so extraordinary. Yes, what's playing in the light show, you know, what's on the movie, is of interest sometimes. Sometimes it's very enthralling. Sometimes it's very terrifying. Sometimes it's very heartbreaking. Sometimes it's very inspiring. Sometimes it's very confusing. Sometimes it's illuminating. I mean, the light show can, just like a movie, can be many different things. But like right now, look at your experience. It's illuminated, isn't it? It is lit up. This is the light show. So just let yourself appreciate the fact of that, the fact of illumination, the fact that everything is lit, everything is a light, everything is light. Even the darkness is illuminated, isn't it? It's illuminated as darkness. So the fact of illumination is we could say, the fact of reality, the fact of existence, the fact of something is here, seemingly. How do you know something is here? Well, because of the light of, call it the light of consciousness, but that is always here. When is that ever absent? I mean, we've never experienced its absence. If we experience something and we call the absence of the light, that's what we're experiencing. That's what's illuminated. There's no escaping the illumination. And no effort is required to make this illuminated. It's on full force. It's spontaneously here, effortlessly here, way before you take any steps to try to turn the light of consciousness on, the light of reality on. Here it is, full-blown illumination. Isn't it something? I mean, it's just...
I love when you bring that up, John, because it's so easy to take it all for granted.
I know, sometimes it's like, but yeah, I mean, here it is, right? The miracle is here. Miracle in the sense of not explainable. Can't explain. How can we possibly explain the presence of this? But yeah, it's everything, isn't it?
one time Alan Watts was talking about idols. Mm-hmm. And he was saying that most, quote, reasonable people will not take a stone statue to be the absolute reality. But far more insidious is an intellectual, precise, seemingly precise description of the absolute reality. He used the example of an undifferentiated aesthetic continuum. Mm-hmm. Now that's a real nice, evocative description of absolute reality. Mm-hmm. And it's insidious because people that are inclined intellectually, for example, will identify with something like that. Mm-hmm. And that's an idol, just like a stone statue or a golden calf.
Right. I think, yeah, no, very well said. And I think that, yeah, I love Alan Watts. I think that my understanding of the idea of, do not worship idols is an aspect of that is that, again, the tendency we have to imagine that the totality, the absolute reality is found in certain things and not others. And then we turn those things into idols and worship those. But the real thing to worship is all of it, if you're going to worship anything. Because that's the real, it's that which is inclusive of everything. So why set up one thing and elevate it above all other things? That's to make it into an idol and to diminish some other thing and imagine it's not, What's that wonderful story of, I think it was Ramakrishna, where I've maybe told this story before, but it's one of my favorite stories to illustrate what I'm talking about, where Ramakrishna was a, Indian spiritual teacher and well-known. And Ramakrishna had a lot of devotion, expressed a lot of devotion towards Kali, that aspect of the divine. And so he would hang out in the Kali temples. I guess it was one in particular. Bill probably knows this a lot better than I do. But in this story, there's the Kali temple, and it's being overseen by the priests of the temple, right? And Ramakrishna is this complete wild mystic. I mean, he's not abiding by by the conventions of religion, for sure. And so apparently there's this thing with statues where, out of respect, you are always, prostrating, your head towards, and you never are supposed to put your feet, towards the statue. And so the priests come in one day and they see Ramakrishna lying down and his feet are pointed towards the statue of Kali. And they get very upset because, he's breaking with the tradition, right? So they come in and they take Ramakrishna and they spin him around, so his feet aren't facing blasphemous, I can't say that word. In blasphemy, his feet are facing the statue, right? And so they spin him around so that his head's facing the statue. And the story goes that when the priests do this, the entire temple spins around with Ramakrishna. Love that story. It doesn't matter which direction you're facing, because every direction you're seeing the same thing. Kali is everywhere. The divine is in all directions, not just certain directions that we then elevate as somehow more God than others. That's to miss the reality of it, the absolute equal, absolute nature of everything. And that story just highlights that in such a great way. Or as I wrote many years ago, we overlook the miracle that lies before us for the simple reason that we keep looking for it somewhere else. This is the miracle. There is no other miracle. There is no other moment. You'll never have another moment. And yet you're constantly having other moments, but you know what I mean? You can only have, you can't be anywhere other than here. So this is it. This has to be it. There's no greener grass on the other side because there is no other side. There's just here.
And there's no grass.
And there's no grass, or it's all grass. Yeah. It's greener than green could be. I was just aware as I was talking about this, just kind of came into my consciousness, this feeling of, sometimes it's as if, I sometimes call them like the primal flavors of reality. I mean, all the flavors are the flavors of reality, but sometimes there's a sense of some of them kind of being a little closer to the bone of reality. And the one that was just arising for me was this sense of love and this sense of, almost like the feeling tone of reality itself is love. Love in the sense of this absolute, unqualified, unconditional embrace of everything. This is the embrace of everything, without reason or question. It's radiating. That activity of radiation was what it feels like of the creation of this moment, if you will, the radiating of this moment, the emanating of this moment feels like the movement of embrace, the movement of, well, there's no words for it.
For me, the recognition of that embrace is worship. Mm-hmm. That's what worship means to me.
Yeah, and I think it feels like in a very real sense, you know, the reality is in worship to, or devotion to itself in all of its forms. It's an absolute love with all of its emanations. It is all of its emanations. But it has this feeling of reveling in all of its manifestations, of just absolutely tasting itself in all of its forms, and drinking from itself. And you know, there's no way to describe it, but
reveling in and reverence for.
That's how I feel about my 2-year-old grandson. I'm reveling in, and I have reverence for him.
Yeah, lovely. Well, those little emanations fresh into the world are, they're potent reminders of some of these primal qualities of reality. You know, it's absolute undefended nature, unguarded. You know, there's no defense there yet. It's absolute vulnerability. And that's really the way reality is. It's just absolute vulnerability. But from the perspective of its real undivided nature, it's vulnerable, pure vulnerability, pure openness, but also at the same time invulnerable, because there's nothing separate from it to harm it. There's just itself, and so it's indestructible. What? There's not something to destroy reality. There's just reality. And that's what we are. We're made of that fundamental, infinite, absolute indestructibility. I'll read you something that I wrote not too long ago. You might enjoy. Brief little piece. It's called "The Painting That Is Your Life." Imagine that the whole universe consists of a single painting, and that this painting is exactly whatever you are presently viewing. In other words, there's no other reality but what you're presently viewing. This is the whole of reality. This is absolute reality. What you're seeing right now, that's it. The entirety of reality right there, present as whatever is being seen, whatever is being heard, whatever is being experienced. That's it. There is nothing else to see. There is no other painting to experience. No better painting that could ever be experienced. There's just this single solitary painting, the painting that is your life. But this painting of reality is unlike any you've ever encountered, for it's not just sitting there, static and unmoving. No, this painting is alive. It's in a state of constant flux. The image is moving and dancing, transforming themselves moment by moment into something else. Take a look. How is a painting of your life appearing right now? And what about now? It's different, isn't it? Every instant the painting shifts, even if in the subtlest of ways. And what about us, the supposed viewer of the painting? Well, it turns out that we're not actually outside viewing the painting as if it were some object apart from us. No, we, the apparent viewers, are actually an intrinsic, inseparable part of the painting itself. The seer of the painting is also in the painting. Remember, there's nothing but the painting, the viewer, the viewing, and the viewed. A single apparition. As we move from moment to moment, experience to experience, circumstance to circumstance, we're simply traveling to different portions of the painting. You can never enter or exit the painting, where there's only the painting. Remember, you can never be cast out of the only thing that exists.
Doing that mind-blowing thing again, John.
It's reality. Reality is mind-blowing. That's why our minds get blown by it. If we just look, it'll just continue to blow our minds. Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
Is that in your latest book?
No, it hasn't appeared in anything yet. I haven't shared it until now. It's like, I don't know if you ever watched or read the Harry Potter books, but in the Harry Potter books, all the photographs are they're all alive, you know. So it's like that, you know. This is the painting, the photograph of reality is alive, like everything's moving. It's a moving picture, right? But there is no other. Wait, maybe there's another painting somewhere else that I could see that might be better, a more enlightened painting, a freer painting, a more love-filled painting. But no, there is no other painting. It's like dreaming, you know, there's no other dream than the dream that you're dreaming until the dream changes, and then that'll be the dream. There's no, I mean, that's a great relaxation to see that no, it's not some other perception. It's the perception you're having right now. That's the absolute reality. This perception, this instant of seeing, this instant of perceiving. Because that's what's real, that's what's alive, that's what's actual. Anything else is a fantasy. You can feel the aliveness of this moment, the electricity of this moment, the energy of this moment, the dynamism of it, the absolute power of it, vitality of it, and every single aspect of it is so alive, isn't it? Bursting forth with so much intelligence and the very streaming forth of this instant is the very openness and light and boundlessness and indivisibility and lusciousness and nourishment that's being sought. All of it is here as the streaming forth of this instant. All of that. The most recent song I wrote, I'll leave you with these words. I would play it, except I don't have an instrument with me right now, but how does it go? Here we are, feeling everything. This unfathomable mystery, shining forth as all I see. Here we are, knowing everything. It's the miracle of life itself, revealing endless wealth. The richness of this has no bottom to it. It's endlessly rich. Even the difficult moments, the ones we describe as difficult, are endlessly, boundlessly rich, luscious movements of reality itself. And that's discovered by exploring the fathomless, indescribable nature of all moments. Well, thank you all for joining me. Always such a pleasure. And I will wish you a wonderful rest of your Sundays, wherever you may be in the world. And maybe I'll see you down the road on another call sometime. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.